Former French rugby international Gilles Ligier turned his hand to the roads after his playing career ended, first building a road construction company in the midst of France's motorway construction boom and making friends with influential local politicians François Mitterrand and Pierre Bérégovoy on the way, then taking to racing single-seaters in the late 1960s. He made his Formula One debut at Monaco in 1966, but with little success in privateer Cooper and Maserati cars, he partnered up with his friend Joe Schlesser to start a Formula 2 team, only for Schlesser to be killed on his F1 driving debut. Ligier retired from racing and turned to building sports cars, teaming up with designer Michel Tetu to design the JS1, the initials stood for Joe Schlesser, a production sports car. Ligier cars contested Le Mans throughout the early 1970s, but in 1974 a new opportunity fell into Gilles Ligier's lap. Matra had decided to pull out of F1 and he bought the team and its assets. With backing from French state-owned Gitan Tobacco, Ligier entered F1 as a constructor in 1976, with Matra as engine supplier. Jacques Laffite guided the team to 2 podium visits in its first season and went one better with the team's first win in Sweden in 1977. A French team, French driver and French engines, the first all-French win in the sport's long history. 1978 wasn't so successful, but the 1979 Ligier JS11 was a handy chassis, and Laffite took 2 race wins and Patrick Depailler won before breaking both legs in a hang-gliding accident and missing the rest of the season. Replacement Jackie Ickx added a couple of lower points finishes to take the team to 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. In 1980 the team went one better with 2nd place, a race win apiece for Laffite and Didier Pironi, and the team were regular visitors to the podium. With Pironi departing for Ferrari, Ligier signed Renault driver Jean-Pierre Jabouille, but he was injured near the end of the season, and the team turned to veteran Jean-Pierre Jarier to fill in until Jabouille could regain fitness. For 1981, French car manufacturer Talbot bought a stake in the team to increase funding, and Gilles Ligier's old friend François Mitterrand was making a run for the office of French president. Ligier had every reason to be confident of challenging for a world title in 1981. Jarier was born near Paris in 1946 and began his racing career on motorbikes, but switched to cars at his mother's insistence, and she sold the family car to buy him a Renault 8 Gordini, the car in which many young French drivers got their start. He impressed quickly and moved up to Formula 3, finishing 3rd in 1970, and European Formula 2, where he took a couple of 3rd places before his Shell Arnold team bought a March chassis to give him his Formula 1 debut in 1972. It was a one-off, but brought him to the attention of others, despite a lack of funds curtailing his 1972 season. For 1973 he moved to the Works March Formula 2 team and won the title in dominant fashion before moving up to Formula 1 full-time in 1974 with Shadow, where he ended up as team leader in his first season after the death of Peter Revson. He took a podium position that year and even led a race, but Shadow were on their uppers, and after dreary 1975 and 76 seasons, Jarier moved to the new German ATS team for 1977, also driving single races for Shadow and Ligier. 1978 saw further bad luck with reliability, and Jarier left the team halfway through the year before deputising for the late Ronnie Peterson at championship-winning Lotus for the last 2 races of the year, putting it on pole in Canada. In 1979, Jarier had a much better year with Tyrrell, visiting the podium twice and scoring regularly, but the 1980 car was worse and he only scored 4 points, so an open-ended deal with championship contenders Ligier looked like a good bet. Happy-go-lucky Laffite began his racing career as a mechanic, working alongside childhood friend and later brother-in-law Jean-Pierre Jabouille, and it wasn't until his late 20s that he began racing seriously. His rise was meteoric, winning the 1972 French Formula Renault title, then the 1973 French Formula 3 title, including a win at Monaco. 1974 saw him racing for March in Formula 2 and winning a race in his first season, and an F1 debut with Frank Williams' ISO Marlboro team soon followed. Although Laffite scored a 2nd place at the Nürburgring in 1975, the team ran out of money and he dropped back into F2 and won the European title while waiting for another opportunity. It came in the shape of Gilles Ligier, who recruited him to head up the new team for 1976, and in 1977 Laffite took the first win for himself and Ligier at the Swedish Grand Prix. He continued with Ligier throughout 1978, 79 and 80, improving all the time, and helping the team to third and second in the 1979 and 1980 Constructors' Championships. To write the full history of Ferrari's involvement in Formula One would be to write several books. Involved in top-level motorsport since 1930 and the most consistently successful and iconic team in the sport's history. Ferrari had been involved in every season of Formula One since its inception in 1950, and despite the odd bad year, had never had a sustained period of uncompetitiveness until the early 1970s. In 1973, things got so bad that Ferrari actually failed to win any races, and even missed 2 Grand Prix while they readied a new car. However, for 1974, the team signed rapid Austrian Niki Lauda and saw an immediate upswing. Lauda and friend Clay Regazzoni guided the team to second place in the Constructors' Championship, and the next 3 titles went to the red cars. Niki Lauda was joined by Carlos Reutemann for the 1977 season, but the two didn't get along, and Lauda was also falling out with the team management and decided to leave at the end of the season. When they decided to run unknown Canadian Gilles Villeneuve in a third car for the last 2 races of the season, Lauda walked out there and then, and Villeneuve got the drive full-time, alongside Reutemann for the 1978 season. When Reutemann in turn left for championship winners Lotus at the end of 1978, Ferrari offered Tyrrell race winner Jody Scheckter the drive, and he repaid them by winning the driver's title, while he and Villeneuve took 3 wins apiece to give Ferrari the constructors' title as well. 1980, by contrast, was an utter disaster for the team, one of the worst seasons in its history, as the team didn't visit the podium once, scored a meagre 8 points with no higher place than 5th, and Scheckter suffered the indignity of failing to even qualify in Canada and retired at the end of the season. With Villeneuve finally stepping up to lead the team in 1981 and rising star Didier Pironi signed from Ligier to replace Scheckter, the team had to hope for better in 1981 as it moved to turbo engines with a brand new chassis to replace the 312T that had been in use since 1975. Son of a piano tuner, Gilles Villeneuve developed a mechanical aptitude for cars at a young age, but money was always tight, and it took him some time to slowly work his way into the single-seat racing that would lead him to greater things. He sold his house to finance his career, and he, his wife and 2 young sons lived for some time in a caravan travelling from race to race on the Formula Atlantic circuit. After winning the 1974 World Championship Snowmobile Derby, he was able to demand appearance money as well as winning prize money, and for a while most of his income came from snowmobile racing, which helped in turn give him the fearlessness, delicate handling and ability to race in low visibility that helped in his single-seat career. Villeneuve met and impressed James Hunt at a Formula Atlantic race in 1976, and McLaren put the young Canadian in an older chassis for the British Grand Prix of 1977, where he attracted favourable attention and was offered a drive with Ferrari at the end of the season. Supporting first Reutemann and then Scheckter, Villeneuve finally stepped into the lead role for 1981 with the South African's departure, by this time already a favourite among the tifosi for his bravery in the cockpit. Didier Pironi began studying for an engineering degree, following in his father's footsteps, but soon realised that sport would be his life and enrolled in the Paul Ricard Racing School and was picked up by the government-sponsored Pilote Elf scheme to support young French drivers. Pironi's rise was rapid, Formula Renault champion in 1974, Super Renault champion in 1976, and coming to wider attention by winning a 1977 Monaco Grand Prix support race. Elf's support and this indication of talent were enough to gain him a Tyrrell drive in 1978, and despite the team's lack of finance, he showed his quality by taking 2 podium finishes the following year. In 1980, Guy Ligier called and Pironi joined the all-French team, winning his first race in Belgium and taking 2 more podium places on his way to 5th place, despite unreliable equipment. His association with Ligier was short-lived, though, because he was offered a Ferrari drive for 1981 to replace the outgoing Jody Scheckter. The Arrows team was a relative newcomer to the grid, having been founded in 1977 by Franco Ambrosio, Alan Rees, Jackie Oliver, Dave Wass and Tony Southgate. Former driver Oliver had left the Shadow team in order to found Arrows. The team made immediate headlines after readying their first car, the Arrows FA1, in just 53 days. Signing up Swede Gunnar Nilsson and German veteran Rolf Stommelen to drive, the team made more headlines as soon as they appeared for the 1978 season. Gunnar Nilsson was diagnosed with terminal testicular cancer and retired, so Italian rookie Ricardo Patrese was brought in from Shadow. Financier Ambrosio was arrested for tax irregularities, while the Shadow team sued for copyright infringements over the design of the FA1. A new car, the A1, was readied in just 52 days after the FA1 was banned, and Ricardo Patrese came second to Brabham's fan car in Sweden, finishing just ahead of Ronnie Peterson's all-conquering Lotus 79. Controversy continued to dog the team throughout 1978, as Patrese was blamed for causing the Monza accident that killed Peterson, and banned from the following race at the demand of his fellow drivers led by James Hunt. 1979 was calmer, but also less successful, though Stommelin's replacement Jochen Mass was much more consistent than his predecessor, and the team's fortunes picked up again in 1980 with another second place, again for Patrese, this time at Long Beach. For 1981, Jochen Mass departed and took the lucrative Warsteiner sponsorship deal with him, to be replaced by another Italian, Siegfried Stohr, and sponsorship from Italian firms Beta and Ragno. Born in Padua, Ricardo Patrese had a distinguished career in karts, European Formula 3 and European Formula 2 before being handed his F1 debut by the Shadow team as a mid-season replacement for Renzo Zorzi, who had run out of money. He became known for his confident, sometimes reckless racing, but scored the team a point at the last race of the year in Japan, and went with Jackie Oliver to the new Arrows team after Gunnar Nilsson's tragic death. Patrese again proved himself to be fast but often careless during 1978, and after nearly winning Arrows' second ever race and taking a fine second place in Sweden, he was involved in and blamed for Ronnie Peterson's fatal accident, with former champion James Hunt claiming that he had been pushed into Peterson's car by Patrese and leading calls for the Italian to be banned. A less confident driver might have fallen apart, but Patrese rallied to finish fourth in Canada after a one-race suspension. 1980 saw Patrese again step onto the rostrum, but again he was frustrated by unreliability. Siegfried Stohr was born and brought up in Italy to an Italian mother and a German father, and during his teenage years his love of racing came second to his academic career, from which he emerged with a degree in psychology as well as a budding karting career, which he parlayed into Formula Italia cars at the grand old age of 24 in 1976. Winning the title in 1977, he moved up to Formula 3 for 1978, with backing from the Beta Utensili tool company, and won the title in his first year, including a special win at Monaco against some of the best racers of his category. This led him into 1979 with Chevron, but the team was uncompetitive, and Stohr switched to Alan Docking's DS Racing team for 1980, which led him to a win and second place, and thanks to his Beta backing, a chance at an Arrows drive in Formula 1 for 1981. Enzo Osella had raced sports cars for the Abarth garage during the 1960s, and by the end of the decade was running the Abarth factory team under the Abarth Osella name. When Abarth sold out to Fiat, Osella went solo and founded his own team near Turin, running a variety of sports car and hill climb cars, but really seeking a way into the single-seater market, which he eventually did by hiring Antonio Tomini to pen a Formula 2 racer, which was entered by Giorgio Francia in 1974's European Formula 2 Championship. The Osella team continued in Formulas 3 and 2, along with sports car racing, and in 1977 came second in the European Sports Car Series, with drivers including Lello Lombardi and Gianfranco Palgioi Palazzoli. By 1979, Osella had his sights set on Formula 1 and persuaded Eddie Cheever, who'd had a clutch of F1 drives in 1978, to drop to Formula 2 to help develop the team, while Palgioi became team manager. Osella made their Formula 1 debut with Cheever at the wheel and denim sponsorship in the 1980 season. It was a rough debut. Cheever failed to qualify 4 times in the first 6 races and only finished 1 race, 12th in Monza, all season. However, Enzo and Joey were convinced that by using pay drivers they could run 2 cars and increase their chances of getting the results that they wanted. Argentine Miguel Angel Guerra and Italian Beppe Gabbiani were signed up, both from the Minardi Formula 2 team. Miguel Angel Guerra had made his way up through the junior formula into the European Formula 2, making his debut in 1978 with a couple of races in an uncompetitive Chevron, before having a better 1979 in a March, 3rd place at Hockenheim, followed by 4th at Thruxton with the highlights. For 1980 he joined Minardi and had a more consistent, if less spectacular season, to finish 9th overall, but it was his sponsorship dollars that took him into Formula 1 with the Osella team. Although it was his money that got him an F1 drive in the end, Beppe Gabbiani was one of the most promising of the young Italians coming through the junior formula in the late 1970s. He went straight into Formula 3 and managed to win his first ever car race, no mean feat, and rapidly progressed to Formula 2, where, although saddled with an underperforming Chevron, he managed to turn enough heads to graduate to Formula 1 in 1978, just 1 year after his single-seater debut. Sadly, this debut was with the Surtees team that was on its way out, and the 21-year-old didn't make the most of the limited opportunity and returned to F2 until another chance arose, which it did in 1981 for the Osella team. Theodore was one of 2 new teams debuting in 1981, but team owner Theodore "Teddy" Yip had been around Formula 1 for some time. Born in 1907 in modern Indonesia, then part of the Dutch colonial empire, Yip had built himself a successful business empire including shipping, restaurants and car dealerships, and had been instrumental in the development of Macau as a tourist resort and the institution of the regular hydrofoil service between there and Hong Kong. Yip was passionate about motorsport, developing the Macau Grand Prix into a major event and using some of his wealth to act as benefactor to teams and drivers, first with Brian Redman's Formula 5000 team, then Australian driver Vern Schuppen, who he backed first into the US and then into Formula 1 with Ensign. Yip later backed Alan Jones and Patrick Tambay into Formula 1 as well and became more involved in the Ensign team, commissioning Ron Toronac to design a new car, which sadly was not a success even with talented drivers such as Eddie Cheever and debutant Keke Rosberg. Yip continued to have fingers in many racing pies, including the Shadow team and a Wolf project in British domestic Formula 1, but decided in 1980 to concentrate solely on one project and bought the ailing Shadow team. Renamed Theodore Racing, with Tony Southgate designing the new TYO1 chassis and Patrick Tambay being given a full-time for the team's Long Beach debut, the team was registered under a Hong Kong licence, reflecting its true international character. Debonair cosmopolitan Tambay was educated in both France and the USA, and his initial career was in Karl Haas's Formula 5000 team, where he caught the eye of Teddy Yip, who began to bankroll his rise into the more senior formulae, and in 1977 Tambay won the Can-Am Championships with Karl Haas and was offered a Formula 1 drive. First, a one-off race in the pay-driver merry-go-round that was the Surtees team in 1977, then for half a season with Yip's Ensign team. In 1978, Tambay joined McLaren, but the once great Mark was going through a rough patch, and he managed only 8 points in 1978 and none at all in 1979. Returning to Haas and Can-Am for 1980, he won his second Can-Am title before being offered the sole drive in Yip's new Theodore team for 1981. The Toleman team was another 1981 debutant, but its pedigree went back as far as 1926, when Edward Toleman founded a small motor firm. By the 1970s, Edward's sons, Ted and Bob Toleman, alongside managing director Alex Hawkridge, had begun to be involved in a variety of motorsport categories. Ted was also a notable speedboat racer, and in 1977 a Formula Ford 2000 team was launched, which quickly moved up to Formula 2, entering a March chassis for South African driver Rad Dougal in 1978, and expanding to 2 cars, now Ralts with engines by Brian Hart, for Dougal and Brian Henton in 1979. In 1980 the team built their own chassis for the first time, designed by Rory Byrne, and still with Hart power. Brian Henton and new signing Derek Warwick aced the Formula 2 championships, and the drivers finished first and second. In November of 1980, Hawkridge announced that the team would move into Formula 1 for the 1981 season. After some initial discussions with Lancia about a possible deal for engines, the team decided to stick with Brian Hart and a turbocharged version of the F2 engine. Although turbo technology was still in its infancy in 1981, it was clearly the way of the future, and Toleman hoped to steal a march on the opposition. The team were permitted to miss the first 3 flyaway races of the season in the USA, Brazil and Argentina for financial reasons, and to enable them to ready the car, and the team would debut at San Marino. Brian Henton came from an unglamorous council house background in the British Midlands, and made his way into Formula V, where he won the 1971 championship, announcing cheerfully that he had his sights set on the F1 World Championship. The combination of his ebullient confidence, undoubted talent and humble beginnings won him the admiration of the British racing press, who dubbed him Superhan. 4 years later, he had graduated through F3 and F2 and was offered a Works Lotus drive for 1975 to replace Jackie Ickx, but sadly the timing could hardly have been worse. The dominant Lotus 72 had finally been obsoleted, and its replacement, the Lotus 76, was a disaster, and his career was tarnished by the failure. He spent the next few years competing mainly in F2 with a sprinkling of one-off F1 drives that never turned into anything solid, before being picked up by the nascent Toleman team and guiding them to the F2 championship and back into the promised land of F1. Hampshire-born Warwick raced stock cars in his youth, winning the English Superstocks Championship at the age of 16 in 1971, followed by the World Superstocks title 2 years later, before graduating into open-wheel racing and winning the 1978 British F3 Championship. He moved up into F2, where in 1980 he was spotted by the Toleman team and brought into the winning squad, and the team brought Warwick with them into Formula 1 for 1981.